Welcome back to Take Action News, everybody. David Shuster here. We're talking about the vote at the United Nations to begin the process of recognizing the Palestinian state. A remarkable moment at the UN, and here's how it was reported the next morning on CBS News.
An historic United Nations vote could lead to more upheaval in the Middle East. The UN General Assembly voted 138-9 yesterday to recognize Palestine as an independent state. It does not make Palestine a full UN member, but it does provide a new level of diplomatic recognition. It is also a setback for Israel and the United States.
Joining us now to talk about this, Aziz is a Palestinian activist, author, and scholar. He divides his time between Washington, D.C. and his hometown of Jerusalem. He is a advocate of nonviolence. Fascinating background. Aziz, welcome to the program. Thanks for being on.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So first of all, your reaction to the UN vote.
My reaction? Well, I think it was expected to happen. The Palestinian Authority needed to go to the UN to gain some legitimacy, especially after what's been happening in Gaza. It was predicted that majority of the countries in the UN will vote for a Palestinian state, and very, very few will vote against it. So there was nothing surprising there.
I got to ask about your background in connection with all of this. You grew up active in Fatah, which is the military branch of the PLO. You threw rocks at the Israelis during the first Intifada, 87 to 90. Your older brother was arrested by Israeli Defense Forces, locked up without charges for a year. He came back very badly injured from torture, died shortly after returning home. You hated the Israelis at the time, right?
Yes, I grew up absolutely hating the Israelis, as you said, and in that time I even didn't know the difference between Israelis and Jews, so to me it was all the same thing. I grew up very active in Fatah. I grew up very active in mobilizing, protesting, throwing stones, all that kind of stuff.
And what made the difference? How did you get on this path of nonviolence? Was there an incident? Was there a program? Take us through that.
Yes, it was when I started learning Hebrew. After finishing high school, I refused in high school to learn Hebrew. I grew up in Jerusalem, where Hebrew is mandatory to learn. And I realized after high school that without Hebrew, I couldn't really get going in life. And I started studying Hebrew in an ulpan, which is where Jewish newcomers go to learn Hebrew. And that was my first introduction to Israelis and Jews who were not soldiers and settlers. All my interactions before were with soldiers and settlers. And suddenly, I'm meeting these people who are different, who have different opinions, and we got along very well and started building friendships, and that's where my journey started.
And the rest is history. As we speak to you, you're at an airport headed to Australia to talk to American Jewish community there. Given your background, therefore, and the incredible journey that you've had, is there a lesson learned in terms of how American Jews view the UN vote and view the moderate influences in the Palestinian territories?
Yeah, I think often when people talk about Palestinians, they like to lump us together. Even when they talk about Gaza, they like to lump all Palestinians together and not know that there's a very strong, diverse opinions within the Palestinian territories. Even with the UN, some people were opposed to it within the Palestinian community who believe in one-state solution, for example. So there is a very diverse opinions, and what I try to do is to try to show that internationally. That's why I'm going to Australia. I'm speaking different conferences and events there on Palestinian perspectives and social enterprises, Palestinian economy, and so on. And I try my best to present that diversity within the Palestinian community.
Do you think that understanding about diversity, both in terms of the more sort of radical Palestinians who see Israelis as all the same, as oppressors, as being militaristic, and on the Israeli side who see all Arabs as the same or all Palestinians the same, how do the Israelis and Palestinians, the governments, get over that in terms of trying to remind folks that no, there is a diversity of opinions, and there are a lot of people on both sides who are interested in nonviolence?
Look, it's normal that there'll be always radicals. I think the mistake we often do is give the radicals too much voice. They are not the majority, but they are the loudest. And the best thing we can do is to try to give more voice and more place and space for people who are doing nonviolence coexistence. I work with a lot of Israelis who are doing amazing work for peace, who come to nonviolent events with Palestinians, stand hand in hand. You wouldn't know who's a Palestinian, who's an Israeli. And we need many more of those events. The things that bring the people together against, and it's not just let's meet and do nothing. It is nonviolence. It is resistance for justice, for peace, for both sides, not for one side to win over another. And there are people who are ready to do it, but we need to do a lot more of that work, and we need internationally to get more people involved. You see in the U.S. here that the conversation about Israel-Palestine is very dominant of who's right and who's wrong. Either you have to be pro-Israel or pro-Palestine. As of being pro-both is impossible. And we're trying to shift that conversation to say, I don't hate Israelis. I have very good friends who are Jewish who are Israelis, and same on the other side. And instead of supporting me against them, I want you to support justice and peace for both sides.
It's such a great point, because I fervently consider myself a Zionist and pro-Israel, and believe that the best way to strengthen Israel is to have a Palestinian state and to work even harder at a peaceful solution. Where do you see this going in the Middle East with Palestinians and the Israeli conflict, given, the recent violence and Hamas launching the rockets and Israel bombarding and killing not only Hamas leaders but also innocent civilians along the way? Has that settled down? Do you have any reason for optimism over the next year?
I didn't hear the last sentence you said. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I guess the question is, do you have any reason to be optimistic about things over the coming year?
I'm always optimistic. I think you cannot view a conflict within just 2 years or 5 years or even 50 years of its history. If you look at other conflicts in the world, some took hundreds of years, like the Irish conflict. So we're eventually going to come to an end. The question is, how soon can we come to an end? And my work is trying to bring it on in faster, trying to convince both Israelis and Palestinians that through violence, yes, you will get security, you'll get some gains in a short term, but in a long term, it will only make more destruction. We need to think in the longer term. The attack in Gaza, the rockets on Israel are not going to bring security or stability and freedom neither to Israelis or Palestinians on the long term. But if we do think of coexistence, of how to live together, and try to find there is no other alternatives, try to work on it, then we'll get there. It's just a question of how long, how many people have to die first, unfortunately.
I assume that the media, you would think the media is partly to blame, because, look, the Hamas fires rockets, and there are people in the streets of the occupied territories who will fire, guns in the air to celebrate, as if every Palestinian is cheering on Hamas.
No, not every Palestinian is for Hamas. I think, as I mentioned earlier, there are very strong different opinions within the Palestinian community. But I do have to say, the recent round of attack has hurt those of us who are working for nonviolence. Specifically, Hamas was able to get Israel to agree to a lot of stuff through violence that we, the nonviolent people, haven't been able to convince Israel to do it. And that makes them able to come out in the street and say, look, you see, through rockets we achieved something. For example, expanding the fishing zone in Gaza, or easing the restrictions of the blockade, or not assassinating people from Hamas. All these things that people who are doing nonviolence have been engaged in negotiations with Israel and saying, you should do these things and show that it's through negotiations, through diplomacy we can do it. Now that Hamas was able to achieve those, they're able to go in the streets and say, look, it's through firing those rockets we're able to achieve it. And that's making our work a lot harder.
Aziz Abu Sarah, Palestinian activist, author, and scholar. Aziz, thanks so much for being part of the program. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
You're very welcome. And again, if you want to follow Aziz, it's Aziz Abu Sarah on Twitter. He also contributes to 972 Magazine. It's an independent online Israeli-Palestinian news outlet and blog. By the way, 972 is the telephone country code for Israel. The Palestinian territories have 970 as their code, but you can reach some Palestinians in some areas through 972. Anyway, fascinating person, terrific activist and author. What an amazing discussion. Coming up, we'll talk with Alan Rosenblatt with our social media segment. What's happening, what's trending. You're listening and watching the Take Action News.